Well, anyway, thanks for turning up on this on a day that I certainly wouldn't have done. And anyway, this is, welcome to my world. This is what I sort of do, and there's all these paintings here. Loads of people will know and loads of people won't, but I'm a sort of working painter. I just do this all the time. I don't do anything else. There's no hedge fund. There's no safety net, really. So I spend most of my time painting pictures. And for quite a long time I've been using egg tempera, which is an old medium which, again, some of you will know about and some of you won't, where you use egg yolk, a little bit of oil in my case, and water, and you just grind up raw pigment, and it's pretty much what was being used on the predellas and altarpieces in medieval Florence. It's been used and abused over the years by a lot of people. There's some terrible American tempera painting by trying to do sort of semi-religious Memling alikes by people who've never seen them in the middle of Arizona. So some of the nastiest painting you could ever see will be done in tempera. But it works for me, and I found it it chimes with what I think about things and how I work. Now, I'm going to talk through some of these paintings, I think, probably the easiest way, because that's where my prompts all are. This is Three Cubs. This is where I come from. This is Burgess Hill. This is the place that the competitive lifestyle people of Lewes look down on. But it's actually a rather nice place. It was a good place to grow up in when I did. And this is St John's Church, and we used to scoot past the graveyard at night on our way to Cubs. I was one of those three Cubs. I'm not quite sure which one. And it was quite scary, and we were allowed out at night. It was fine. It was after dark. I lived a mile and a half away. Nobody worried. The Moors murders were going on at the same time, but nobody thought anything about it. And so it wasn't exactly a protective environment. Well, you're going to be back by 7:30. We'll be back by 7:30 then. I'd call the police if we had a phone, but nobody did. So it's stuck in my mind a lot, that church. I used to know the names of a lot of the people in the graves, because I used to hang around there and try to scare myself. So I thought it would just be nice to commemorate it, and I quite like to just do stuff about. Although I'm sort of quite known for doing a lot of stuff around Lewes, and I've been in Lewes since I was about 14, but I do come from Burgess Hill, which, as I say, is probably never heard of extra virgin olive oil or fair trade coffee, and I can remember Lewes when it hadn't either. But those days are gone. A lot of you will recognise this. This is the Maltings car park, made completely uninteresting by being resurfaced as it just has, although obviously much more effective as a car park, but I quite liked it when it looked like the Somme. And I just do like the idea of it not being what you think it is. So you have a sense of people utterly confidently sashaying around the town, and there are little mocking echoes of what Lewes is and what actually life is everywhere that just follows them. So I like the idea of somebody just having an important mobile phone conversation and somebody that looks like they've an escapee from Wilson, Keppel and Betty, slightly just making their presence felt. Because I'm a great believer in layers of experience and time and stuff, and the older you get, I think the more you see it. And it's all there, it goes right the way back. Nothing stops happening. It all happens at the same time, and however However, the place seems to suddenly have turned into, you know, a cross between Hampstead and the Groucho Club. There is still layers and layers and layers, and loads of us remember when there were tractors in the town and all the traffic held up by old vans with baler twine holding the... And then before that there was a foundry, before that there was all sorts of industry, and the idea that people can glide in and terraform it into the place they want it to be, well, they can, and it's fine, and there's lots of good stuff comes with that. But what they shouldn't think is that there are little spirits, little mocking spirits that know where the truth really lies. This is another one as well. This one, John Barleycorn. That's a big jug that my dad has got, which belonged to his great-grandmother, and it's absolutely hideous. And I'm due to inherit it because my father's under the impression that I really like it, and because I used to quite like it when I was 6, but I hate it actually. I think he went to have it valued because he thought it might be quite good, but they actually understood when they looked underneath it. It did say it came free with so many coupons from Tide, but the soap flakes. But that was in about 1910, so it was that might make it actually interesting, but I can't see me retiring on it somehow. I placed that sort of in a sort of Humpty Dumpty sort of way on a wall just off the high street, and I'm rather hoping that my cat is going to knock it down and smash it. Yeah, we've got powers. I rather like this. So I actually did see a sort of small child coming away from a party past the graveyard again. It's sort of thematically linked with that to some extent, and you sort of see a kid walking past something like this, and there seems to be the power of the graveyard, power of this huge yew tree, which is probably 800 years old or something, and the unseen rainbow, the unseen graves, and yet it all becoming some kind of continuum. So I really rather like that as an idea that there are again a groundswell of things that are happening that are not always to do with shopping, having and getting. And one of the things that does sort of disappoint me about Lewes is that shopping and having and getting seem to be largely the sort of drivers here now. Whereas once upon a time there was feeling and understanding and a kind of earthing into the place. So it's another antidote to that. They probably all are to some extent. This is my allotment. This is the abominable author himself. In some ways, this is actually talking against what I've just been saying, because this is based on a Robert Graves poem, and the Robert Graves poem is largely about the banality of the extraordinary. So it's largely about him. You know, well, I'll read it. You know, as I was hoeing my land, 6 badgers walked up with white wands in their hands, and the burden of this is they told him his dinner was ready. And then they vanished. And he went home and he thought, what was that all about then? I knew his dinner was ready. And I think that's the thing about all these strange deja vu things. You walk down the street and you think of somebody that you haven't thought of for ages, and you walk around the street, around the corner, and you see them. Or you have these dreams that seem to be full of, burdened with and freighted with all this sort of significance. And you wake up and it's some, really banal thing. And I quite like the idea that visions and the supernatural aren't always very interesting. They're actually quite boring, and there's nothing much going for them. And but they still happen at the same time. They do still happen. So you can't knock any of this, because I mean, I have this thing where I accept everything. You know, I don't have any beliefs. I just don't rule anything out. For a start, that hedges my bets just in case there is something going on. But the other thing is, you know, I cannot possibly, you know, I've never seen God, but I've never seen an atom either. Don't remember the last time I tripped over an atom. I'm assured that the world is made of these things, but you know, what do I know? I haven't seen one. I just sort of sit. But you do get odd feelings and sensations, and sometimes you can trust them, and sometimes you can't. And everything seems to be happening, but you know, I'm not prepared to sort of set a stall out for any of it, because you know, it's like the whole thing about heaven. You know, I tend to go with George Orwell that you know, it's perpetual choir practice in a jeweller's shop. And that seems to be about the least likely thing that happens. And so if there is such thing as, you know, continued consciousness, if it was something I could understand, I'd be really disappointed with it. I mean, if it's not completely beyond me, then I can't imagine it can be much good, frankly, if it's just a retread of what I've been doing for the last, you know. So, but on the other hand, it might be all these things, and it might be other things as well. So I'm quite happy to just rule nothing out. But it's nice to paint badgers. Don't get many badger opportunities. This is another Burgess Hill painting. This is in the housing estate I grew up in, which was one of the really early ones in the 50s in Burgess Hill. There used to be a strip of woods across the road, right across the road from houses on one side, road, woods, and then the downs. And I could see Jack and Jill windmills out of my bedroom window and everything. And as kids, we used to play in these woods all the time. And, you know, sometimes you'd be there with your mates, sometimes you'd be hanging out, sometimes you know, there'd be stuff going on. But sometimes you wander over there, because that's what you did. You sort of hung around in the woods to see who turned up. And I remember sometimes sort of late afternoon, early evening, strange light coming into the place, and seeing this holly tree and being utterly scared of it, because you just were in that age and that kind of mind. And William Blake said this thing about, I can stare at a knot of wood until I'm afraid of it. And I think I'm very aware of the fact that I'm quite capable of doing that as well. I was certainly capable of doing it then. And so that sort of rather scary holly bush and that kind of transfixing qualities that something could have when you're that age is what that's about. And I mean, that whole woods has been done from memory, because it's now more houses. There's a whole other load of houses now that, you know, go back to about there. So it's a kind of memory, but it's a kind of memory of how the immediacy of that was. These were the sort of houses I grew up in. That's not my road, but there was all on the same estate. They were all the same. But again, in the early days of housing development, they didn't cram everything into it. You know, there were actually blades of grass were allowed to survive. And this is still here, this piece of ground in Burgess Hill, looking not unlike that still. And again, it's that sort of early evening, getting outside the backs of the houses. And they were very good times. I mean, there were a lot of people, when I was a kid, this was their first proper house with an indoor bathroom. This was, my parents at the time were 25, 30. And there used to be like running races in the streets with the parents doing it and skipping with the kids, because they were 30 and they'd just come out of a war, and they actually had a house with with proper plumbing, and they had a bit of garden and they grew vegetables. It happened in Lamport, happened all over Lewes as well, all around the south. And if you were growing up in that time, although nobody had any money, it was actually quite an interesting good time. You were in and out of all the houses. It was very nice. But of course, having said that, I still managed to be anxious and weird. I discovered somebody gave me an old Alice in Wonderland book, and it wasn't the Tenniel illustrations. It was some kind of stuff that was obviously lashed up in the 40s and 50s. That was really kind of. I mean, I haven't seen it from that day to this, but I can remember it very clearly. But they were pretty rubbish illustrations, nowhere near as kind of good and edgy as the Tenniel thing. Anyway, I sort of developed this absolute obsession with Alice, and I was really scared of it at the same time. And these were very unscary illustrations. But I got really scared about it, and for some reason, I used to sort of hallucinate about these things. I used to think I could sort of see Alice and bits and pieces of Alice in Wonderland around the place. So I, fabricated that really, which was just the back of a fairly banal housing estate, and the idea that you might see Alice, really. A lot of these haven't got a lot to be said about them. I mean, this is pretty much just the fields in flood. It's a straightforward, fairly flat statement of what was there. And I did toy with the idea of trying to impose something else onto it. But at the end of the day, I just found that it was easier just to put the flat planes of colour and just to do it as an interlocking design. And I think I'm glad I did, really. It's a very straight painting. It's a very straight painting, and it's pretty much what you could see from the train coming out of Lewes on the way to Cooksbridge. Yeah, this other one next to it, the paradise flycatcher. It's not actually a paradise flycatcher, which is a real bird, but a friend of mine who grew up in Zambia, he accidentally shot and killed a paradise flycatcher when he was young, and it's the most sumptuous, beautiful bird. And he felt absolutely terrible about it because it was he threw a stone and never expected to hit the thing. And then he killed this amazing looking thing. I just pinched the name of the bird because I quite like the idea of there being such thing as a paradise flycatcher. Like, you can be in paradise and catch flies. And again, it goes back to this sort of strange sort of Victorian notion of heaven. There you are in paradise, where somebody can have flies. And this is the patch of ground up by the bowling green, which I'd done quite a lot of stuff in. And I saw this old sort of Victorian engraving of some strange little composite creature with a top hat and so I thought I've got to use that. That looks like if there was a paradise flycatcher, that's what it ought to look like. And but I thought I'd sort of make him a bit more of an endangered species than he endangered to the point of never having existed in the first place. But so I put my old cat in there, who was quite a famous cat. His name was Harris, and he was quite a famous cat for quite a number of years in Lewes. But he died with his boots on about 20 years ago. But he was the pub-going cat that everybody knew. So 18 pounds of ginger hell. And I thought I just put that in. That's a funny little bit of ground up there. I've set quite a lot of paintings. And I often think it's somewhere that anything can happen. I don't know why. It's just a piece of baked earth with some trees and some benches. And the bowling green looks far more interesting. But there's something about that little bit of earth where you've got that little thing where you can look out to the Battle of Lewes. And I've set a couple of paintings there, and it always seems to be quite an engaging little piece of ground. I don't know why. It just feels pretty good. It feels like that there's a lot going on there, rather than the bowling green, which is the tilting ground, etc., etc. and Tom Paine was there apparently. But I think the good bit is that little bit of baked earth over the other side. Yeah, this trough, people. I like this one. This was up on a lot of people probably know that cattle trough. That's up by. That's up at the back of the back of the golf club. And I was up there. I go up there periodically and have a wander around or at various places. And there was just this lovely clear light on this trough showing the bottom of it. And I just imagine this little aquatic kingdom, these little people sort of in it. My original feeling was I was going to do these little sort of Triton-like people inhabiting it. And then for some reason or other, I did people in suits because it just seemed like a better idea, and I like the idea of them in their little trough. These are the kind of people who talk to people like me and say, "Well, you've got to get in the real world." Apparently the real world is largely getting, spending, and doing people over, and having things that whatever. But and I actually think I'm quite in the real world, really. I think Kalahari Bushmen are in the real world. If you were actually dropped suits into the Kalahari, you'd probably find that their whole idea of what the real world really was would change rather dramatically in about the first afternoon when they realised they didn't know where any water was. So I just like the idea. I like the look of the trough, and I like the idea of it being a place where there might be this sort of strange little kingdom, a bit like the Catholics who don't think anything happens outside it, This is the bank opposite the Elephant Castle. And originally, well, obviously there is no house there now, but there were houses there. And I saw an illustration by a woman called Ruth Cobb, who wrote some very nice little books about Lewes. She wrote one called Travellers to the Town and another one that I can't remember the name of, but they're illustrated by her with some very pleasant, some wonkier than others, but all quite engaging and nice little pencil drawings. And she drew that house there, and I saw it, and that bit of wall there. I've never known that house being there personally. I don't remember that house. But I like the idea that the house might remember being there. And that, again, it's all the sort of many layers of being in the town. This is it doesn't disclose itself all at one go. And sometimes it doesn't disclose itself at all unless you're really lucky and you're interested in it. And, and a house is a magical thing. People live, die, grow up in these places, and they're born there. And that was there, and it's not now. And I if you're thinking about things like ghosts and stuff like that, I think maybe lives do impress themselves on the fabric round them, and who's to know? It's just not one big recording device. And I like the idea that there's an interplay with it, and that these things are still going on. That everybody talks about that old quote about time is just a device to stop everything happening at once, which actually I think Bergson, it was Henri Bergson that said it, although he's been attributed to loads of people, but he is Bergson because I looked it up, and. But it is true, everything is happening at once. Everything is happening at once, I think, and it's just a question of how you negotiate yourself in that period and in time. I don't find any problem about understanding everything happening at once. So that's really one of the things that painting is about. It's all there. It's all still there. And the house that was there before that is still there, and it's still going on, and people are knocking at doors and sitting around tables, and it never stops, ever, and never has. It's a kind of urban magic, really, and it's magic in general. This is a very straight painting of what's on my windowsill at home. This one. That's a baby stuffed alligator, which I'm sure we've all got one of. And that's a frog, sort of Japanese frog thing that I bought with some money I was left from my grandmother in about 1983. And the other thing is just a little man from the 20s, and it's just this is just the windowsill. But I just like the juxtaposition, I like the strangeness of it, I like the fact that you can put these things together and automatically a little narrative starts to organise itself, even if it's not, hasn't got any sense or import in it at all. And you just become engaged by these things. So that's really all that is. That's just a very straight little account of what I see in the mornings, because it's nice to do that as well. It doesn't all have to have some sort of sting in the tail and some little payoff. You know, like who's that artist? Oh, Terence Cuneo. You know, used to do the locomotives, pictures of locomotives and things like that. And he had this little trademark thing of putting a mouse in. So all his paintings became Spot the Mouse things. It was like Where's Wally? And you know, sometimes I just do paint a straight picture. It doesn't always carry a narrative. I don't know how closely any of you looked at that, the imp and fop. We have imps and fops in Lewes, which is very, very interesting. This actual little imp isn't on that piece of moulding. I put him on there. This is the corner of Cooper's, the funeral directors. And if you look at that, you won't see a little sniggering imp up there at all. But I hope you will now. I hope you will now. Every time you go past, you'll wonder where it is. And again, this is again the multi-layers of Lewes. You know, I like the idea of the downs in the background and the sort of, you know, the kind of the Lewes chap with, you know, wearing his stuff, which there seems to be quite a lot of that going on, where Lewes is a lovely backdrop to be chapping about in. And I quite like the idea that there may be something older and something in the fabric of the place that is slightly taking the piss. So that's largely what that's about. Also, it's on a funeral director as well. So, you know, if you want to read more into that, although it doesn't say that, but most people who live here know it is. This is the back of my house. This is what I can see out the window. You get skies like that. That's looking over. The back of my house looks over like the back of Albion Street. So that's what that roof line is. And I just quite fancied putting. I was going to put a bird in there, and I thought, why don't I put a little dragon in there? Because really, I mean, most of my real influences, as my wife has pointed out several times, come from. She said, you get most of it out of Rupert books, don't you? And actually, I hadn't really thought about it, although having said that, I have read every Rupert book, you know, over and over again. And I said, well, no, actually, this is Ivor the Engine. Thank you so much. Idris the Dragon. It didn't set out to be Idris, but it sort of turned into him. And I just like the idea, and it's called O Bud, you know, which is a morning song. And I like the idea of a dawn chorus or something breathing a jet of flame instead of just twittering. And also, if you've had enough of tweet of the day, that's a good antidote. So that's largely what that is. And also, there was a lovely. We do get some lovely skies at the back of the house there because it looks straight across the Coombe and everything. And I always wanted to do this thing. A Samuel Palmer, artist I really do love a lot, and he was for all his kind of intensity, he had quite a lot of levity about the way he talked about his work amongst other artists and everything, and he devised this effect of a sky effect, which he then called the Margate mottle, because a bit like the Camberwell carrot, you know, he invented it He invented it in Margate, and it's quite mottled. I was very taken with that. I always like the way that, you know, Samuel Palmer's writing is very, doesn't take himself at all seriously. So anyway, I wanted to do a sort of the equivalent of a sort of Margate mottle as well, which we do see at the back of the house. So it's a kind of combining those things. I can't actually afford to stay at home, but luckily we've got a friend of ours who's been buying my stuff for years and actually has supported me a lot. And he's got a house in Malaga that he lets us use, and so we've been down there a few times now. And I'm starting to get to feel the feel of the place, really. I don't really know anything about it, and it's quite good for me to be in a place where I don't know anything about anything, because here I know, you know, if I'm here, if I'm anywhere in Sussex, I'm going to know what's going on. Over there, I don't. You know, so I'm just going around looking at stuff. Well, I mean, obviously, there's no basis for an art career in that, but you know, so that's what these are. These are just little snapshots of being down there. The only one that's not this. Again, these are all very straight. These are all very straight. This one isn't quite so straight because his umbrella's on fire. It was an idea that I wanted to do for a long time because I read a thing in Evelyn Waugh's letters, how he was walking down the Strand and he suddenly saw a bloke whose umbrella caught fire, which I thought was brilliant, and I just wanted to use it somewhere. And when we were there, and there were people with umbrellas and everything, I thought, well, this is actually quite a good place to put the umbrella on fire. So I did it there. But I also did, because of the narrow, strange streets. There's a great painting by Crivelli in the National Gallery, which is the Annunciation with St Emilius Ascoli. But it's very precipitous streets, and there was sort of a Virgin Mary there. But there was this sort of thing only being witnessed by one small child who was up on a sort of, well, not in a window. So I just put a little figure in a window to make it a bit like that, just because it's a painting I really like, and I thought try and tie stuff together. And then we've just got, this is again very straight. This is Margaret, my wife, in the place we were staying in Malaga. Fag, bottle of wine, blue sky. What's not to like about that one? And so that's pretty much that. That's called HMS Terrible. That's the magic circle. But it used to be a little ornamental carp pond years ago when it was part of a private garden. And I thought I didn't see any reason why it shouldn't still be one. And so, that's a strange little corner. I mean, you know, I put in my hours before the mast drinking cider up there when I was 15. But I just like the idea of it. And then I saw a photograph of a little, about sort of 1908 tin plate toy, incredibly elaborate, of a little ship, which was obviously meant to go on the Serpentine Lake or something like that. And it was called HMS Terrible. And I like the idea of something being called HMS Terrible, being so diminutive in such a domestic situation where it's actually of no terror to anybody, except for even the goldfish couldn't care less, you know. And it just focused the whole thing, because that's, if you get up on the bank, there's quite a nice little amphitheatre around that. So that's really pretty much what that painting that's around, really. The thing is about explaining paintings all the time is it makes it sound like a series of codes that need cracking, and that isn't what they are. You know, it's just these things that arise out of looking and being in a certain way. And I think again, you know, if you want to do any kind of art, you have to have a well-stocked mind. So that, I mean, the difference between an internet mind and a well-stocked mind is that an internet mind is you know where to get this information, assuming you know how to interrogate the system. But if you've actually got a lot of stuff that you've taken into yourself, These things stew and change and mutate in your brain. You don't have to go outside to get them. So, and they're there ready and waiting. When you do see a trigger and you do see something that's going on, they're not things that you have to go and find out, like going to the shops. I mean, it's almost like this sort of internet mind. It's another form of shopping, really. You're shopping for knowledge and information, whereas you should be imbibing that and growing up with it, and you should be made of that stuff, not going out looking for it on Amazon, you know, or sort of thinking you can buy it into your life. And it's very much a question of, you know, the well-stocked mind will actually work within itself. So the bits of poetry and the half-remembered bits of the Beano and a film you saw and a view you saw and a thing you went to once and an atmosphere and a crunch of gravel as you walked up somebody's... All these things can coalesce, and then you can find a moment to try and put that stuff together. So that's why, yeah, much as the internet is great, it's not a mind, it's a shop. Again, that's just a straight little painting. That's the Christmas tree that they have at the top of up by the War Memorial, and that's pretty much when I come out of my house what I see that time of the year. It's not again, it's a straight painting. It hasn't really got any subtext. It's just a straight piece of work. You know, it's just sometimes you know, for all the imported narrative or the intrinsic narrative, sometimes what you just want to do is just account for what's there, just see what's there, and that's one of those paintings, really. And I sometimes think that some of these paintings that have got no real narrative or twist in the tail are the ones that tell best. It's like painters like Chardin, you know, you just do a tablecloth falling off a table, or, you know, sort of the folds of a tablecloth. And sometimes there's something very pure and nice about that, which oughtn't to be forgotten when you otherwise you can get into the world of party tricks if you're not careful, and that's something I'm also quite keen to avoid. This is another little, fairly straight one, and again, this is not Lewes. That's drinking in the museum. That's the Museum Tavern in opposite the British Museum in London, and it's just a good old pub. And again, it's this everything happening at once. People sitting, somebody sitting down here, and then some old boy who could just have come out of the museum in about 1890, sitting in the corner. It could be Turner, actually. I quite like the idea it might be Turner because of the hat. And but the great thing is, once you start opening this stuff up, it could be anybody. You don't actually have to be part of. You don't have to be part of any kind of correctness. You know, you can just do it. The title is Vespertilian Wing, which I've been wanting to paint for absolutely ages, because it's a... I've always been a big Robert Graves fan, as you probably tell from the other one. But I remember years ago reading some by Robert Graves, and he wrote a poem called Beauty in Trouble, and he talks about this sort of like slightly satanic character, and he had this great line, flaunts Vespertilian wing, because, you know, there's a species of bats called Vespertilianidae, and anyway, he coined this word. He thought it was great, and he forgot about it, and then years later he looked it up in the OED, and he found that the only recorded instance of it was actually him in that poem, and I thought it was a great idea. So basically, I just put somebody with a surreptitiously sort of vampiric quality just going up Paddock Road, and so that's, yeah, he's about where the Leaf Man used to be, where I think that's a nice little point to put stuff.